Hello, everyone. My name is Elvira Rakova, and today on our interview we have Paul Edwards. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Greetings. Good to hear from you.
Yes, Paul is a president and founder and operator and everything what you can imagine in the compressed air consultants company, and already with many years of experience in the field in the auditing of compressed air system. And Paul, I'm really happy to have you today here. Can you please tell us a little bit about your background, about your experience? How did you end up auditing compressed air systems? And how did you end up in this field?
I obviously did something wrong when I was in college to get in this field. No, I left, I graduated as an engineer in 1982, and it was a particularly poor year for engineers. It was actually a downturn in the economy, primarily driven by the oil and gas business. And I went through a bunch of interviews, and one of the ones that came out of it was Ingersoll Rand Company. And so I ended up going to work for Ingersoll Rand from 1982 to 85 in various positions between the corporate headquarters and field. In 85, I left Ingersoll Rand to go work for their distributor in Miami. And there I got to learn small business as well as international business. And then in 97, Ingersoll Rand invited me back where I had various positions at the corporate level. And then in 2003, due to creative artistic differences with some of the people there, I ended up leaving and starting my own business.
Okay, so it means for how many years you've been working as an independent consultant and independent auditor?
20 years.
20 years.
2000, yeah, a little bit over. It'll be in another 2 weeks. It'll be 21 years. But I left in March of 2003 and started CAC.
Okay, great. So what I really like about your company, when I just went to the website, it's everywhere it's written independent. So independent consultant, independent solution, independent advice. Can you tell me more about this independency thing on in the compressed air auditing, why it is so important and what do you mean by this?
Well, as we've discussed before, competence is more important than independence, but the value of independence should never be underestimated. One of the things that we started seeing a lot of was that a lot of the air system improvements that were being done around the turn of the century were being driven by these automated surveys. And the automated surveys are actually a step up in terms of analysis of these systems, but they weren't always the right or the best return on investment. So, for example, there are certain machines, especially here in the US, that were running under what's called modulation control. And there's ways of switching that to a load, no load type control. And doing that costs you a little bit of money. You might have to buy a receiver tank, but it really didn't cost much. But these surveys would come out and say, oh, you need to go buy a VSD compressor, and they didn't give everybody all their options on there. So in the course of doing that, we kind of came to the realization that, at least the first realization was, is that the value of the independence was that we weren't driven to sell compressors. And in fact, as our whole business process has developed, we actually take delight in helping clients actually turn off compressors through a series of activities.
I think that also independency drives the competence, right? Because when the person or when the auditor is not trying to sell some solutions, is
Mm-hmm.
trying to find the best solutions that are available on the market. So independent of what his or her business is. So I think this kind of like helps to each other. And when, in your opinion, what is important for the company, for the end user? What criteria are important when they're looking for the auditor? So what they have to look for?
Well, there's several things. First off, you have to decide what is the problem I'm trying to solve, right? Engineering 101 is that how you define a problem determines how that problem or the solution that's going to be developed from it comes along. So if you see every air system as, driven by the compressors, then you're going to see every answer as being a supply side thing. The reality is that the system's being driven by demand. It's not being driven by the supply, and the supply is always responding to something that always happened in the system. So we try to define the problems of the client um, in terms of money in most cases, and then have that process of how do we recapture the money, whatever category it is, to drive it. So the beauty of the independence in that respect is that it actually will allow us to go anywhere in the system and use any solution from any brand or whatever. We're not beholden to any one particular style or type or technique. We can use it from an entire smorgasbord, for lack of a better word, of every option that you have on the table.
So you mentioned that the demand side is also very important. I'm also fan of this, and myself, I work on the demand side, and then we see what type of the compressor and what is the actually supply side is important. Can you tell me what do you mean by demand side in your cases? What type of industry you usually cover? So I know that you cover kind of heavy interest industries such as cement. What are the specifics there of the demand side?
Well, it's interesting because the demand side is kind of the final frontier of what we do in an industry, and certain industries like cement have a really their application of compressed air is very liberal, shall we say, because you have a process that's hot, you have a product that's very light, and consequently compressed air is very good to manipulate the process. So whether they're adding air to a specific spot or they're trying to cool down a bearing, there's all kinds of ways of abusing the air system, shall we say. And there's some unique characteristics in cement where you have multiple compressor rooms in many cases that make it a really fascinating and an industry where you can actually make a lot of difference. There's other industries out there, such as petrochemical, that we've done some work in that our ability to manipulate the demand side is pretty limited, but it's still worthwhile because the return on investment of making those fixes on the demand side are still going to be very good. We've done work also in aerospace, medical. We've done work in paper and box plants, really just anything that's out there. We've, after 20 plus years, we've done work in just about every industry you could think of.
That's great. So let's talk now a little bit more on the business side, business aspect. So you mentioned before, and this is your logo, that it's about money, not about air.
Right.
And I actually witnessed some customers in Europe that say that compressed air is for free because it's air. I mean, of course, it's in the past now probably, and I hope so. But still, for your customers, they usually order audits for saving money, but not for the sake of audits, just to put in some reports. So what is your business around? Is it more about the immediate savings, low ROI, or what is the focus?
Well, we let the client define the problem for us, but most clients, if you're working in the maintenance and engineering department, they sometimes are forced to use discretionary spends where we're trying to get up to plant management and production and have a conversation with them saying, as long as you treat this as a discretionary, not as an ROI, you're going to drive similar decision making that led you to where you are today. When we get to that level, we basically look at three primary costs. One is operating costs, the second is capital avoidance, and the third is productivity gains. And so we go through a question and answer period trying to understand where they might be spending in those three areas to see if we could actually use that as a return or the basis of the return on investment for the project. So while energy tends to be the thing that everybody thinks of, reality is that there's often other drivers that are going to contribute quite a bit to the project if you're looking far enough and wide enough.
Yes, I think that improvement of the productivity is usually one of the main drives, and the energy efficiency, sometimes it's actually the nice byproduct. So, but then it also can be vice versa. You start with the energy improvements, and then you have the immediate gain also in the functionality. And what do you think? I mean, from all your years and all the respect that I have to your work, you're not so old. No, you're not old at all. I wanted to ask you about, in general, about the auditors. How you see nowadays the market of compressed air? Because we have great colleagues in the field. Someone focused more on the demand side. Someone focused on the supply side. What do you think the most important qualities that the auditor should have beyond, of course, the competence and the experience and all the education and probably independence also?
Well, this goes back to the what kind of problem are you trying to solve, right? And so if you're trying to solve a financial problem, you've got to have some ability to understand the financial aspects of an air system. So there's both a technical and a business side to that, but there's also a persuasion side to that too. One of my favorite conversations I've ever had with one of my auditors years ago, he made the comment, I'm an engineer, I just tell it like it is. And so my response to him was, so you're happy abusing your clients? And he's like, well, no, I'm not. I love my clients. And I'm like, well, you did if you just tell them like it is, rather than trying to be a bit persuasive about it. When you're persuasive, you don't necessarily try to manipulate the guy, but you try to put it in terms that he realizes that it's in his best interest. So there's an element of persuasion that's important as part of the auditor. But I think the other thing that you and I have talked about before is also this issue of mindset. When you go out and do an audit, is your mindset there to sell a piece of equipment? Is it to go put in a VSD? Do you have a formulaic, or are you open-minded enough to sit there and say, I need all the information I can, and then from that make a decision?
Yes, I think it's we are all auditors that started later than you. We all have to learn and learn. I think a lot. I also wanted to ask you about the successful projects versus unsuccessful projects. So let's say that you give the customer, so you do the audit, right? Then you give the customer all the suggestions.
Hmm?
In your experience, how many of them actually follow the suggestions, and what are the main keys to make customer actually to implement it? So, and what are the main challenges for them? In your experience, how many percentage of your customers actually implemented the suggestions, and after re-auditing them few years later, uh, how the things worked after this?
You just hit the $1 million or €1 million question, right? The reality is that most of your clients will implement to some level, right? And the question is how robustly they go after that. And that often is a function of the level of the problems they have and the interest of upper management in solving that particular problem. With that said, one of the more interesting cases that we had was a plant in one of our very first audits. They had 13 compressors, and through a series of demand side actions and controls, we were able to get them to run on 6 compressors on a regular basis. So that was quite, a win, several $100,000 US per year. The challenge is 3 years later, we went back and they were running on 12 compressors. They might have gone from 12 to 11 or 13 to 12, but they actually cut it in half, and then they went almost all the way back to where they were before. And as we investigated what caused this, because you had all this money that you were saving, somebody didn't understand the control system, and when they had a pressure problem, they just cut all of the wires leading to the controls, so all the compressors defaulted back to their original settings. And so we started looking at some of the audits we did back in 2005, 2006. And then we fast forward to the audits we did for the same clients in 2016. And we found out that roughly 1/3 were actually worse off than they were the first time around. 1/3 were slightly to marginally better. 2 were better, but nowhere where they could have been. And then 2 really were where they were and where they needed to be. And that got us realizing that there was really a new implementing a project successfully is not enough, because things will revert to the mean if you don't do new things, don't have new behaviors. And what we ended up realizing is you need to have some feedback loop that the system is out of whack, either on the supply side or the demand side. The second thing you need to do is you have to deal with, how am I going to make sure my operators understand how the air system's supposed to run both in the demand and the supply. And the idea behind that is as you have turnover, if nobody's training them, they're going to just revert to the way we always did it. And then the third thing, which is optional but probably highly recommended, is you really need a small compressed air committee, not to meet once a week or once a quarter, but whatever it takes to get your system running to where it needs to be, and then keep it there. And if you do all that, and you do it effectively, you'll never need a full audit again. You might do some mini audits and things along the way, but you're going to have everything in place that you're not going to get off target as that quickly.
Okay. Yes, I really like it. I mean, I rarely see the compressed air committee inside the company. It's usually one person who is also maintenance manager who is responsible for
Yep.
all the utilities. But now there is a tendency in bigger companies to have some guidelines or white papers how they should be used, and they teach also their operators. The other question I have for you, it's about the feedback loop. So what do you mean by this? Is it some monitoring systems, or it is
Yes.
what? Yeah.
It's exactly that. You need two pieces of information. You're going to need the amount of flow, whether it's in meters cubed per minute or hour or CFM, and that's going to tell you your demand side efficiency. When this part of the plant is operating and this part isn't, what should that be? You should know where that approximately is. That should be fed back to the control room or to any of the stakeholders in the air system. The second thing will be the amount of energy required for that flow. So that would be a euros per cubic meter per hour or net dollars per SCFM. And that'll tell you if your supply side is operating at peak efficiency also.
And this is now going to be my favorite question. So I see now various companies. So some companies, they rely only on their expertise, and they have some extensive Excel tables where they do all the calculations. In my company, for example, we created the software, but it's still not as fancy as other companies. And sometimes I see fancy softwares only for compressed air system with the multiple dashboards. And I see this is very complex, actually, for the operators, even for energy managers to have various systems. In your opinion, where is this perfect center? Where is this golden center for monitoring the compressed air system? Should be only the flow, as you said, and some information embedded in already in the systems where this action has to be also taken. So how the user should know how to read these values. So where is this balance, you understand me, between the completely artificial intelligence, because sometimes everyone is talks about artificial intelligence. However, I feel that there is intelligence just missing, so without A. But in your opinion, so where is the compressed air stands now, and how do you see it in the development in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
That's a question I've never pondered before, so I'm going to have to do this one off the top of my head. I believe the information should be as much information as a plant needs to make smart decisions. So that's going to be dependent upon the plant and the people there in the process. At a minimum, we think SCFM and SCFM per kW, or cubic meters per hour and cubic meters per hour per kW, is what you really want to have, because that gives you literally in 10 seconds, you know whether your system's running or not. Then you can have all kinds of other data, such as information or sector flow and all that, but it really comes down to what is that organization capable of handling, and will it help them do what they're trying to do, or will it get in their way? Because we go into some, control rooms and you see these screens with 50 different factors, and things are lighting up red and things are green, and it's like the control room is so busy, they've never been trained on it, they don't understand it, and that can be too much. But often, it can be too little, if you don't have any monitoring, if you don't have any data whatsoever. With regards to where it's going, I haven't a clue. Predicting what AI is going to be capable of doing. Will we have like monkey? Do you know what a monkey cam is? So say, well, there's a famous comedian, late night comedian, and he put a camera on a monkey and followed around the way the monkey did. Maybe we have monkey cams on people, and the artificial intelligence will look at everything, but we're so far away from that, and clients need results now. So, I don't see it as a panacea, but I see ultimately, for the time being, we got to at least have some kind of human interaction and some basic training of what this data means to you as a plant, and that's up to the auditors to be training them at the very least, auditors and or compressor companies.
Yes, I also think that because artificial intelligence intelligence is artificial because it's trained on our intelligence, and I think it's still not enough data out there how to do correct audits and how to help customers beyond the leak detection and the compressor, changing the compressor to more efficient one. So we still need to train those algorithms. Even if you ask some AI tools like a ChatGPT about compressed air, it actually doesn't give you such a good results. Although on about other things, it explains it quite well. And I think like one of the last questions I wanted to ask you is about what would you expect now from other auditors? Not expect, but what you wish that other auditors in compressed air would focus on, and what do you expect also to see in the market, or wish that somehow the market will change, also from side of the end users, maybe from side of the component suppliers or energy auditors. So how perfect market in compressed air would work, in your opinion?
Okay, that's a second question I've never thought before. But ultimately, I think the biggest issue is the two issues are the auditors taking the time that they need to take to ultimately understand what's happening in a system? And then second, understand where your knowledge is knowledge and where your knowledge is opinion. Because we run into quite a few we run into quite a few claims that are out there that just don't have a strong basis in reality. They're a reflection of reality, but they're not always accurate. And if people are going to make return on investment decisions based upon false information, they're never going to get the return. You know, one of the examples, well, there's a lot of examples that come to mind, but we run into problems in the field where the engineer might misdiagnose what the root cause of a problem is, and instead of fixing the real problem, I'll tell you probably one of the most famous stories that I tell ad nauseum is that we went into a plant in South Florida, and in that particular case, the local compressor company had done a small survey, and they had low air pressure at one location. And they basically said, well, you need to add a new compressor, you need to add a desiccant dryer, and this is in Fort Lauderdale, and desiccant dryers aren't needed in Fort Lauderdale, and you need to add a new pipe all the way to this particular application. We actually went in and looked at the root cause of the issue, which happened to be a dust collector, and the dust collector settings were actually incorrect. And what should have been a 25 CFM dust collector was using about 150. And what we found out was that moisture was being fed to that dust collector because somebody made a bad piping decision in months previous, and that the operator, not knowing why the air was wet, but knew he had to get it off the bags, changed the duration, changed the interval. And so now the entire system suffered, and nobody really could put two and two together. The answer wasn't necessarily to go buy new equipment. It was actually to cut the air off from that one location, which was wet air, redo the bags, reset it, and then they could go back to the way they could have. And so instead of spending 50 grand to increase operating costs, we actually found a project for $60,000 and reduced operating costs by about $36,000 a year, if I remember correctly. So the whole point is that, if I wanted a perfect world, it would be that we as auditors understand what we don't know, and we take the time it's required to actually fix these real root cause issues. You asked me the time, I go to clock.
Yes, I think it's a great answer. And I also think another thing that I thought maybe I just would like to add, it's also about the collaboration, because what actually corresponds to the mindset that would not only think in our box, like, okay, I solve only this problem, or this problem, or I sell another component here, or I sell the software, but rather their collaboration between various experts that can not criticize each other, rather than just come together and find some solutions. So, and this isn't my perfect world. So you didn't ask me this question, but I just wanted to.
Well, you already know what my answer is to that.
Yes, exactly. And this is also in your answer. Paul, thank you so much. So I had a really great pleasure to talk with you. I hope we will talk soon more, and we'll record more podcasts, maybe more technical. But I think it's more important to start with the business overview of of the compressed air audits, and also to understand what are the core competence that auditors should have and what also companies should look for, because in our podcast we also share our opinion not only with compressed air experts between us, but also with the end users, with energy managers in the factories, and I hope that you will find it very useful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I hope to see you soon.
Okay.